All right.
So we're on the air. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. Good to see everyone. Welcome to the Technology Committee meeting, and we haven't met for quite some time, so we're delighted to see everybody back. Today is Tuesday, September 17th, and we are being televised. So today we're going to go through two action items after oral communications, an update on broadband and a development of the master plan. And with that, could you call the roll?
Klein.
Here.
Niss.
Here.
Sharp.
Here.
Shepherd.
Here.
4 present.
All attending that should be attending. Thank you. So I have one card on oral communications. If anybody else wants to speak, it's Andy Poggio.
Yeah, you don't have two cards?
I only have one at the moment.
So there was one ahead of time, so lift your stuff up. I see it. No, lift, there.
There it is. And Jeff. And you can go in either order. I don't care, Jeff, if you go first and Andy second or vice versa.
You get your card first.
Flip a coin.
Okay.
But you want to make sure you go to the mic. Thank you.
Okay, so technically this is about item number 2.
You can probably take that mic off, I'm guessing, if it's hard for you to talk because you're tall.
Okay, so this is technically item number 2, the master plan. And it seems to me for the next
Do
study.
you want to wait a minute then, Jeff, if it's, that's
Okay.
an agenda item? Why don't
It
you wait
is.
till number 2 comes?
Okay.
Andy, is yours the same? Okay, good. Okay, thank you both. So there are no one who wants to speak to us in general. So that would take us to our action item, which is an update on the broadband conference and the one that was just held in New York City. And if any of you would like us to go over the one we went to in Kansas City again, we could also do that. So, Jim Fleming, you're going to give us a report on going to New York City.
Okay, and I can give one on Kansas City also.
Great. Why don't you do them both at once?
Okay, I'll talk about Kansas City first.
And we should also let all the people watching know that that Nancy Shepherd, Vice Mayor, and I also went to that meeting in Kansas City with Jim.
The Fiber to the Home Council Conference was at the end of May in Kansas City, Missouri. The title of the conference was From Gigabit Envy to Gigabit Deployed, a Community Toolkit for Building Ultra High-Speed Broadband Networks. The takeaways from this conference were several, and I'm going to list through them very quickly. The key factors that are within the control of a community that can make a real difference in whether a network gets built and becomes a fiber-friendly community. There's 5 different aspects of this. One is community and local government leadership and support, and specifically by developing a clear broadband plan and ensuring the commitment of community stakeholders and government personnel. The second is to review approval requirements and permitting by defining expeditious processes for permitting and inspections, and also permitting innovative construction techniques. The third is use of existing infrastructure. It's recommended that cities publish data about existing infrastructure, make rights-of-way and utility poles available on a clearly defined basis, and ensure make-ready work is performed expeditiously. The fourth is proactively improving infrastructure, and specifically that would include providing space on all poles for new attachers, install ubiquitous conduit, and fully leverage existing conduits and ducts. Also use building codes and community development plans to drive fiber deployments. At the conference, there were several workshops that we attended, and the first was a real good workshop about defining why a community needs gigabit networks and the emerging applications that will require more bandwidth. And specific examples are explosion in video content, particularly high-definition video. Upload speeds are just as important as download speeds because of more user-generated content. Cloud computing applications that are becoming more used by the general population and businesses. Distance learning, remote energy management through fiber-enabled smart grid systems, telemedicine, and emerging sensor applications. And that was particularly fascinating in that there's more and more sensor technology that's out there what will rely on communication networks. The next workshop was about lessons learned from service providers, and the service providers are represented both by municipalities and also private fiber-to-the-premise providers, primarily in rural areas, but they had some of the same issues that fiber-to-the-premise providers have in more urban areas. The third was factors in creating an effective business plan, and particularly to understand, in order to develop the plan, understand the cost to build, the ratio of underground to aerial construction, housing density, and other factors. Again, streamlining rights-of-way processes, pole attachments, permitting, and make-ready work, locating and leveraging existing conduit and ducts for fiber installation. Providing video content is a significant issue for small operators, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, but right now, in terms of providing classic cable TV, a small operator in particular has to make the decision to provide that programming, even though the cost of it is significant. And there are some projects that are going forward without providing traditional cable services and just providing broadband services. As I said, providing video content is an issue. Most importantly, the recommendation is to accurately forecast customer take rates. That is essential. And by take rate, I mean the number of subscriptions that you would be able to acquire if you built a network, and that really does drive your cost. The fourth item is regulatory considerations in creating a business model, particularly adhering to the level playing field issue. And the last or fifth item was how to write an effective RFP to attract a fiber-to-the-premise builder. And I think one of the benefits of going to that conference, too, were a lot of the hallway conversations that occurred with people in the industry, both municipalities and the various vendors, the think tanks that are out there that support community broadband. I thought that aspect of the conference was really worthwhile. And I don't know if you want to add anything to that, but it was a significant part of the conference.
I just wanted to say one thing, that since we were a municipality, they didn't know what to do with us. So we were not buying cabling, we were not training, and they also, some of the states already have municipalities cannot do fiber. So there's this sort of, it was sort of nice to be kind of not hustled, if you know what I mean. That and watching the steps that Google was going through as well, as they were running into typical utility municipality issues like trimming trees wrong and getting into some of the hoods that were not able to sign up for Google and stuff. Some of those things were really important takeaways for me that helps me with my thinking about how we're going to do things in Palo Alto.
And I agree with your content comment. I think probably what we were left with at the end of any day was thinking that if you don't have content to offer, you really should think about this differently. And including the fact that your content needs to be 24/7. As they spoke about, when a football game gets interrupted or a Super Bowl, it's a disaster. So they were very clear about the content piece of it.
Moving on to the broadband conference in New York last week, which I attended with Council Member Mark Berman. The title of the conference was Bringing Together 21st Century Cities. The conference was organized by Friedman Consulting, a firm located in Washington, D.C. that provides high-level strategic consulting, communications planning, and policy development services. The conference was supported and hosted by the Ford Foundation. The Open Societies Foundations, a grant-making operation founded by George Soros, also participated in the conference. The purpose of the conference was to bring together leaders from cities developing a variety of approaches to broadband deployment, as well as those who are seeking gigabit, ultra-high-speed connectivity, but have not yet achieved it. Participating communities included Baltimore, Boston, Champaign and Urbana, Illinois, Chattanooga, Tennessee, Kansas City, Missouri, Lafayette, Louisiana, Longmont, Colorado, Mount Vernon, Washington, New Orleans, Portland, Oregon, Raleigh, North Carolina, and the California Central Coast Broadband Consortium. Other prominent participants at the conference included Blair Levin. Blair Levin is the executive director of Gig.U. It's a group of 30 leading research universities seeking to accelerate the deployment of high-speed networks to leading universities and their surrounding communities. Mr. Levin was also, he was formerly executive director of the Broadband Initiative at the FCC and oversaw the development of the National Broadband Plan. Christopher Mitchell, who some of you met when he was here in May, was also at the conference. Christopher is the executive director of the Telecommunications as Commons Initiative at the Institute for Local Self-Reliance. He's considered to be a leading national expert on community broadband networks. Milo Medine, Vice President of Access Services at Google. Mr. Medine oversees Google's Gigabit Fiber to the Home project and other efforts to improve access to the Internet. And Susan Crawford. Susan Crawford is a professor at the Cardozo Law School who recently authored the book Captive Audience, the Telecom Industry and Monopoly Power in the New Gilded Age. It's been a somewhat controversial book, but it essentially calls the incumbents to task for not necessarily upgrading and deploying in a faster fashion, and it's a good read if you want to understand some of the issues at all different levels of the telecommunications industry. The agenda for the meeting focused on 4 areas. The first was how cities can lead high-speed communities with America's broadband future, why cities are facing a very challenging landscape, strategies for success, and how cities can collaborate, and what would it look like if they did collaborate. The meeting attendees included a wide spectrum of cities such as Chattanooga and Lafayette, which have deployed citywide fiber-to-the-premise networks, cities with existing fiber optic assets like Palo Alto that want to evaluate expansion opportunities, cities such as Champaign and Urbana, Illinois, and Raleigh, North Carolina, who have built multi-jurisdictional fiber networks to support anchor institutions, education, communication support for municipal facilities and infrastructure, commercial usage, and programs to bring broadband to underserved communities. Longmont, Colorado, which is about to ask its citizens to vote in November on a $44 million bond to build a citywide fiber-to-the-premise network. Cities like Boston and New Orleans, who believe they are underserved by the incumbent carriers. The California Central Coast Broadband Consortium, a group of 3 counties, specifically Monterey, Santa Cruz, and San Benito counties, that want to improve broadband access in underserved areas in their counties by building a fiber backbone network. In Kansas City, Missouri, where Google is building its citywide fiber-to-the-premise network. Key takeaways from the conference, cities first need to define why their communities need gigabit connectivity. If a city has serious plans to build fiber-to-the-premise, it's important to build based on what the status of telecommunications will be 5 to 10 years from now. Cities need to understand where the incumbents are headed. The debate is about the state of the industry 10 years from now, what it is today, rather than what it is today. To build a citywide network takes time. The planning and deployment of a fiber-to-the-premise network will take 10 years. Cities need to develop strategies to deal with the incumbents. The incumbents game the system to inhibit competition.
Jim, you sound like you're quoting somebody. Is that right? Or and if you are, who are you quoting?
Yeah. In terms of taking 10 years?
Yeah, I think like
Blair Levin.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's something that I've heard from other people involved in this area, in municipal broadband. Cities need to develop strategies to deal with the incumbents. As I said, the incumbents game the system to inhibit competition. This came from both, pretty much from the group, but cities must take the initiative to be fiber friendly, and that's something that we heard in Kansas City several times. And specifically that talks about attending to zoning, access to rights of way and poles, expedited permitting, and environmental reviews. In other words, doing a series of things to ensure that deployment happens efficiently and quickly. At the policy level, and this came from Mr. Levin also, Congress and FCC think the current status of broadband in the country is not a problem. The mayor of Lafayette, Louisiana, Joey Durrell, made an interesting comment. He said, they've provided consumer access to telecom services, voice, video, and internet, and differentiated services to support economic development and job creation. However, it's very difficult to go up against the incumbents. And if you look at the history of that project, they spent years in courts and challenges from the incumbents. They finally prevailed, but it took them a good five years to really get the project off the ground because of the legal threats. From Milo Medina at Google, made some interesting comments in terms of consumers think of cable TV and broadband as separate services. They're not. And he made a very specific comment about that. Fiber networks built for residential use must offer cable TV and broadband connectivity, while acknowledging that for a small operator, cable TV is difficult to execute due to the difficult contracts with programmers. Cable operators are implementing constraints on over-the-top delivery, and it's unlikely the FCC will intervene. Mr. Medine also talked about what he called the quiet work. In other words, preparing for fiber deployments. This work includes laying conduit, ensuring easy permitting processes, which drives down the construction cost per home passed by the builder. Cost per home passed is a critical driver for any builder and operator. The group listed a lot of challenges, and I won't go through all of them, but the most significant ones were competition and the state of that in the telecommunications industry. Unintended consequences, and what was meant by that is that networks are often built by communities today, and within 5 or 10 years, they really aren't what they thought they were going to be. And that particularly links into the competitive aspect of it. You build it, the market changes, and quite often a small community broadband project doesn't have the ability to change with how the market has changed. It's a significant issue. Of course, policies at the state and federal level, ubiquity, and what's meant by that is the challenge of building on a citywide basis. It's very difficult to build on a large scale. Again, the incumbents gaming the system. The digital divide, which was discussed at great length, I don't think that applies too much to Palo Alto, but in other cities that's a very significant issue. Also engaging users, in other words, getting potential citizens, businesses, anchor institutions interested in looking at alternatives from what they're using now from the incumbents. And last but not least is we don't know what we don't know. And that was very...
How do you know that?
That was had a lengthy conversation attached to it, in that every city has challenges and everyone is in the process of figuring out what to do. And even those communities that have built, they recognize that the markets are changing and they need to keep up with it. And again, you have to have this crystal ball that will tell you where the market will be 5 to 10 years from now. The conclusion of the conference, it was a discussion about what cities can do as a group and what is the best way to present a united front. It's difficult to discuss because there are so many different models for municipalities to evaluate. Each city has different goals and needs. As a result, cities need to create a narrative about why a community broadband initiative is good for the city. Cities must make broadband part of any economic development plans. Don't allow the incumbents to define what networks should be. Cities contemplating building broadband networks need to build political will by providing messaging, guidance, research, and metrics, and other resources. And also finding out what networks work and what networks don't work is very important. Political forums and groups to work through are the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Specifically, the conference has a Technology Innovation Committee and the National League of Cities. There was some concern that at those forums, broadband kind of gets diluted in the scheme of things. There's so many other issues that broadband doesn't necessarily get considered in depth. Another organization which the city is a member of is the National Association of Telecom Officers and Advisors, known as NATOA. They provide a lot of information and studies and so forth about the industry, and typically the members of NATOA are the people within city government that oversee the franchise agreements with the incumbent carriers, and they deal with other telecommunications issues. In terms of next step, Friedman Consulting and the Ford Foundation will pull together research, metrics, and narratives to make the case for community broadband initiatives. They intend to create a more formal forum for municipal leaders to speak to each other about broadband initiatives. And they intend to put some meat on the bone. And specifically, they will be proposing some strategic advice and propose ways for municipalities to collaborate. All in all, I thought it was a really good conference. People at the conference spoke very frankly about some of the issues that they have. And what was interesting is there are a lot of different reasons and different approaches to go forward with broadband in communities, and something that I knew, but there are some very specific plans out there that don't necessarily include fiber to the premise, or modest type of enhancements that can be made, with also the goal of becoming a fiber-friendly community. So that was the extent of the conference.
That's a good report. I really appreciate your doing that. I also want to welcome Jim Cook from the Utilities Commission. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your being here. Jim, one of the things that I noticed is you didn't mention Austin. Am I right?
No, I did not.
And I presume then they weren't at the conference.
No, they were not.
And of those who were at the conference, which of those cities would you single out as probably being the most successful right now?
You know, I think the latest projects in the last 5 years are Chattanooga and Lafayette. And, you know, their models were very specific to the communities. In Chattanooga, of course, a lot of it was based upon building out for smart grid.
Right.
And kind of a byproduct of that is the delivery of triple play services. And Lafayette, they really felt years ago that the cable incumbent, Cox Cable, and at that time it was Bell South, were really underserving the community. And Lafayette's a university community, and you know, really felt that they were going to be off the beaten path unless they really moved ahead with the project. And you know, the mayor who was at the conference, he's been with the project for a long time. You know, I think a part of their success is the community really got behind it in a big way, and there was a lot of support among their council and other leaders in the community. But he was pretty frank about how difficult it is to deal with the incumbents, and you can read the history of what they were up against there. For 7 years.
Same message that we got in Kansas City. Yeah, very clearly. Do any of the others have, Larry?
Yep. Thank you. Excellent report. How many people total were at the New York City conference?
There were 14 cities, and there were probably from the Ford Foundation and the Open Society foundations, I'm going to say roughly 30 to 40. I didn't get it exactly.
Yeah,
Quite a few.
That was I wanted whether it was 50 or 500.
Oh, okay.
I don't care whether it's 48 or 53.
Thanks.
Is this going to be a continuing conference or the annual or whatever?
They really didn't say. What the conclusion of the meeting was that they were going to come back with some way for the communities that were there and others to collaborate. That's a word that they underscored. I think, you know, there's a lot of resources out there. Institute for Local Self-Reliance, for example, Christopher Mitchell is one. But, you know, the real goal was to get these very different communities to begin to talk to each other and look at some of the issues that they have. I'll give you one anecdote. Portland, Oregon was there. They have an extensive dark fiber network that was built with federal transportation dollars. And their hands are tied and they can only expand it for transportation purposes. services. So they have this great network that, it's fulfilled what their original mission was, but now, there may be other opportunities. So is there something at the federal level that can be done for them to untie their hands to use the network in a more ubiquitous way throughout the community? That's just one example.
They need a clever congressman or a senator. To follow up on Liz's question about Austin, the same thing would be true for Provo. They weren't there either.
No, they were not there.
Staying on the geography for a moment, have we talked about some type of cooperation with the 3 Central Coast counties?
We have not. I do know their goal is there's areas of those counties that are really
Rural.
off the
Yeah,
beaten path and don't necessarily have access to good broadband. So that's really the goal. A similar project is happening in eastern California. That's they call it the 395 project.
Yeah, and we've heard about that one.
And they actually just got a significant amount of money through a state program to build out that network. But again, these are communities that are really underserved and have been for years, and even the incumbents may not have the intention to even serve them because they are so far out. So by building this backbone, it just brings fiber and broadband access closer.
Well, yeah, it sort of depends on what part of those counties you're talking about. On the other hand,
Right.
Santa Cruz and San Benito counties have people who live there and work here. Long commute, but it's not unusual to find people who drive over 17 every day to work here in the valley. It occurred to me as I was thinking about this meeting today that broadband has not been much in the news since we had our meeting in May. No more announcements of Google making another acquisition or somebody filing a lawsuit against somebody else, or it sort of seems like it's been quiet, or am I mistaken? What do you think?
I think there's a lot out there among the people that write about it all the time, in that there's been a reemergence of interest by communities looking at broadband opportunities. And I think it's a combination of the National Broadband Plan, which came out in 2010, reignited the conversation. What Google's doing reignited the conversation. There seems to be more interest within communities, and at the Kansas City conference, there were a lot of communities there that were doing the same thing that we were doing, is just, what is out there, because we can't figure out what the business case is. And that provided some good information about, for example, how to write an RFP if you want to attract a builder. Real practical advice. And also this recurring theme of get your community ready with the practical stuff. Know what you want, but also the facilities and infrastructure side of it. Make sure that is accommodating in terms of a builder coming in and being able to attach to the poles and use conduit and the rights of way in an expeditious way. And quite often the builders get frustrated by that because they want to build quickly. Getting bogged down in the usual processes within a city is frustrating to a builder, so they may decide not to build.
My last question, it was the same question I had about the New York conference, about Kansas City. Is that intended to be repeated sometime next year? I don't mean repeated, the
Fiber to the Home Council?
Yeah.
Yeah, they have meetings, conferences throughout the year.
Yeah.
And
I get emails from them all the time.
They're a trade group, really.
trade
Yeah.
association.
Go on, yeah.
Not like
but
cities
they're
meeting
good.
there.
It's good.
They're
And again, their membership.
They're in business.
It's a combination of municipalities, private, telcos, a lot of the smaller ones that are still out there in more rural areas, and also the vendors that deal with fiber and provide equipment and so forth.
Good, thank you.
Either of you? questions for Jim?
I don't have a question, but maybe you can think to agree with me on the way I one of my takeaways with Google when we were back in Kansas City is, remember the hedge fund guys that were walking around for, watching Google? They were going wherever they were and watching them. And we, just for investment strategy purposes. And their Kansas City project is still sort of in the R&D and off of the balance sheet. So they're kind of watching to see when it will emerge and show up and what they'll do with it. And just at that same time, Google was starting to have to question the going into the more impoverished communities, because as everybody knows, Kansas City is not homogenous, with a certain income level all the way across the neighborhoods. And they couldn't go into a neighborhood without getting 30% signed up. And then they would give everybody one last chance to sign up as they go into a neighborhood, but getting even 30% in some of those neighborhoods was next to impossible. So I guess my takeaway was, and it triggered your question about why they're not in the news, is that there might be a bit of a pause there as well in Kansas City to try to figure out how to struggle through some of those kinds of issues that we as a city will have to struggle through, but we're used to struggling through those issues. Google is not. They're used to just going in and whizzing it together. And so and I don't know if you had a similar takeaway on that.
Yeah, and I think their strategy in those neighborhoods where people are economically disadvantaged, they are offering a low-level tier of service. It's free, except you have to pay a $300 connection fee. It's free for, I believe, 7 years. You have to pay a $300 connection fee, and they allow you to pay that installation fee in installments. I believe it's $25 a month for a year, and then you have the service for free. And I think it's a service where it's 5 megabits down and 1 up. It's a very low-level service, but it's a good value.
But even getting knowledge for the people to understand how to do it, there was a whole, they obviously were going to be the neighborhoods that weren't going to get wired up quickly.
Right.
There was definitely a struggle to try to figure out how to resolve that.
Yes.
So it was just interesting to watch this company go right into the conversations we have to have about trying to be egalitarian across town.
Yeah, and they call it aggregate demand. If there's a certain amount of demand in a cluster or a fiberhood that they call it, then that makes the business case to build in that neighborhood. And I think the last statistic I saw is roughly 90% of the neighborhoods in Kansas City qualified as a fiberhood, and they're beginning their rollout now. So
That's good to know.
Worth keeping an eye on. Good. Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
I really appreciate that. And Jim Cook, if at any point you want to come either join us or add to the conversation, we'd be delighted to have you. Come on up. Yeah, good. Welcome. I appreciate your coming. So with that, let's thank you, Jim, first of all. And then, as you can see, we have the ubiquitous PowerPoint in front of us. And I'm going to turn this over to the city manager at this point to conduct us through the next part of the meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Maybe it would be a good idea for me to do a little intro before you would maybe hear from the public, just to be sure we're kind of literally on the same page. Guys could flip that. That would be great. We really are at this second point here, sort of revised approach for work plan, and let me sort of describe why we worded it that way. As we were preparing for the, in some way, sort of the really inaugural launch meeting for the Technology and Connected Community Committee meeting. It was really clear that the council's given us a sort of renewed interest and direction on, fiber to the premises and proceeding. And the staff had sort of been putting up still a kind of classic bottoms-up How do we do some engagement work and research? How do we conduct feasibility studies on the potential for this? And then how do we ultimately get to a development of a master plan and being able to go out to the market? And that schedule actually was, we were out in 2015 or something, the middle of 2015, and so we were talking about, I said, you know, I think right now it's really pretty clear. The council's really said, we're really interested in fiber and exploring that and getting going. So we really said, okay, well, look, let's just get to the master planning process itself right now. What is it that we need to do to put us in a position to, say, go out and test the marketplace to see who's out there and who would be interested in helping us sort of provide fiber to the premises. And so we'll go through this in a bit more detail, but I would say that the point that Jim made from the conference, where some of the speakers were talking about being fiber friendly as an essential sort of foundation, is really where our focus is on how to begin to move forward. What are the steps that the city should take, and we're going to ask you for direction in that regard, that sort of prepare the way with everything from doing some network design work ourselves to actually proceeding with an initial environmental review to be able to turn around and issue out an RFP in the marketplace and see what providers are out there and be interested in responding. We think that that will get us more competition and the fastest way to do it. Jim and Jonathan can talk more about that. Concurrent with that, though, we also kind of resurrected some of the work we had done a couple of years ago on the issue of wireless, and the staff will sort of help clarify and talk a little bit more about the idea of non-wired connectivity as an important community issue, and how that includes both Wi-Fi, which we would be making some proposals about how we could proceed with citywide Wi-Fi, and actually longer-term wireless considerations, as we call them, which really deal with non-Wi-Fi related wireless connectivity, whether it's cellular or others. I know I don't see any of our public safety folks here, but there's both a community interest and obviously a connectivity concern that we have about really adequate service in our community. And we want to be talking about sort of a parallel process and not limit ourselves just to fiber, but think about high-speed connectivity as much as possible. And then lastly, we'll talk about the Citizen Advisory Committee, and I think I could jump to that right now. If we've gotten some requests to participate, I think we ought to get the direction from the council first about how you want to proceed, so we would best know how to, no pun intended, how to plug the committee into the work that we would be doing. So that's the thought. If we want to go through flip the slides again, and I'll let you go, we can sort of, as a group, go ahead and talk through this. So Jim or Jonathan?
Actually, I was going to have Philip first. In terms of the proposed fiber to the premise master plan and RFP, the overarching goal for this work is to ensure that residents, businesses, and anchor institutions have access to ubiquitous and reliable high-speed broadband connectivity. For more than a decade, the city has evaluated several business plans and models to expand the existing fiber backbone system for residential use. Given the upturn in the economy, the city believes there is a potential renewed interest from telecommunications service providers in building a network in Palo Alto. Staff believes the best way to attract these providers is to develop a broadband master plan, which would include an engineering study to create a design for the fiber to the premise network, also to define appropriate network specifications, and conduct any necessary environmental reviews under the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA. The master plan will include estimating the total cost to build the fiber to the premise network and also evaluate legal and regulatory issues. Once the master plan is completed, a renewed and focused RFP could be developed, and the city would be prepared to issue an RFP to facilitate competitive processes to attract a third-party telecommunications service provider to build and operate the network. to develop.
Could we stop there for a moment?
Sure.
That seems to me that that's a key decision as to whether, and I'm not suggesting that what you're proposing is wrong, but I don't think it's a given that we would issue an RFP to attract a telecom system provider. An alternative could be that we would run the system. And maybe we need to talk about that, or is this sort of a slam dunk?
Why don't we let Jim continue with this?
I could answer that question.
Okay,
I
go
don't think
ahead.
it's necessarily a slam dunk, but, you know, as part of the master plan, you would probably look at the other models that are out there.
Yeah.
And those models would be a retail model or a closed model where the city would build a system and operate it. That would be one model. The other model would be the open access model, where the city would build the system and allow ISPs to use the network. And then there's the idea of partnering or trying to induce a private party to come in and build it. You know, I think the master plan would focus on trying to attract an outside party.
Well, it just seems to me that's an issue that we really need to talk about, just rather than assuming it's straight up and down.
So I think that's a good point. And I, you know, I sort of feel like maybe the right metaphor is the option offense in football, you know, where we may pass, we may run it, but we're not at that point yet. But we may want to do some of the basic work that could allow us to go either direction. So the thinking of the network design and the environmental review could allow us to decide that, not just through an RFP process, but preliminary to that, to be back before the council, say, okay, here's what this looks like, here's where we are right now, have some evaluation about what forms it could be if the city wanted to provide it. There may be a band of things that could be done. In addition to, or do we want to put out an RFP to bring folks in, or how do we even structure the RFP? What's the blend between the city and that sort of stuff? We think actually the idea of the environmental review, for example, us proceeding with it could enable us to be the operator ultimately based on that environmental clearance, or to be able to certify it in some way and be able to use it and sort of apply that review to some third party coming in. So I think it all works.
I don't have any trouble with that, but I think I personally would want to examine the various models of everybody from, well, all the cities that you mentioned, Lafayette, Provo, so on and so forth, Chattanooga. Okay.
Do you see anything in our plan design at all that really restricts us on that? I don't see.
No, it doesn't restrict us. The next step to develop the master plan, staff recommends retaining a consulting firm with an expertise in developing master plans, business plans, and RFPs for government agencies contemplating building broadband networks. The estimated cost to develop the master plan and conduct the RFP process is approximately $150,000 to $350,000, depending largely on the level of required environmental review. If the environmental review for a fiber to the premise network results in a mitigated negative declaration, the cost for the review would range from $20,000 to $50,000. If a full environmental impact report is required, the cost could range from $200,000 to $250,000. The estimated timeline to develop the master plan and conduct the RFP process is 9 months and will require the time of approximately 1.75 full-time equivalents. So I don't know if you want to ask questions about this part at this point, or...
Otherwise, we'd be moving into the wireless discussion. Do you want to bifurcate it right now?
I do.
I am comfortable with where we are, but questions from either the mayor or the vice mayor?
I have questions, but.
Go ahead.
Well, this is where I'd did get some confusion because I know we've already gone out to get a business plan and a technical analysis as to what we can do with what we currently have. It's with the TELUS Ventures Associates. And the other company, which I know you can give me the name right away when I'm trying to find it, is it RKS?
They did the survey,
Okay.
the market research survey.
Right. And it seems to me that we already have some information here that now it sounds like we're replicating. So I wanted to understand where this would become, and this is the vote that utility commissions had with a 5-4 to do the three things: continue the current business model, discontinue efforts to evaluate improved initiatives, and blah, blah, blah. So how is this going to be a different process, and are we repeating, and if we are repeating, what are we repeating?
I don't think we're repeating. The kind of the core component of the master plan is to do an engineering study, a full-blown engineering study.
So this is an engineering.
Yes, that would get you the total cost, what kind of network you would want to build, the specifications, and I won't go into the different types that are out there.
We don't have to decide closed or open network right now.
Yeah.
It's just the technical.
Right. Those are the main difference. We at this point we really don't have a full-blown engineering study that will tell us this is what the network will be, this is where the equipment will be in the field, this is how the lines will attach to the poles and underground, and the type of furniture, they call it, that's out in the field, the cabinets and so forth. That will be part of the plan, the master plan.
Okay, and then you have made a point repeatedly in your report outs from both New York and Kansas City that the first thing you're supposed to do is define why. Have we defined why? And I know it's because we want to. I know that that's part of it. But I wanted to find what's the problem so that we know whether that's going to influence an RFP for the engineering study.
Yeah, and I did mention that in terms of having a narrative that explains why your community needs gigabit connectivity. And, I think by virtue of putting together the engineering study, that's going to give us some indicators of what type of network can be built and how that network would be differentiated from what's already out there with AT&T and Comcast and others. If the community knows what the actual costs are. And up until now, we've only had estimates. There's never been a detailed, a detailed study completed.
Okay, good, thank you. So it's going to help us get to the why question, to define the why, and I think that's useful.
And another part of the engineering study, again, is what do you have? What are your assets? And in terms of building something, you really need to know access to rights-of-way, pole attachments, the make-ready. And I'm not sure if everybody understands what make-ready is, but make-ready is just literally getting a pole ready to accept new cables, new equipment, and so forth, and that's a big component of the build. So having that data or developing that data will be important.
You got questions, Greg?
I guess I'm sort of thinking about where we are in this process. So the next part would be going to wireless, right?
Yes.
You mean Jim's presentation?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is the next one.
Yes, and now, but obviously, we want specific direction from the committee as it relates to both
We haven't heard from the public.
proceeding
yet, so
on fiber and proceeding on wireless, so we can, again,
I guess I'd like to go out to the public.
Before
Unless you're speaking on the wireless, it's really two separate things. I'm happy to share the rest of the presentation, but I have comments and discussion that I'd like to
Why
make,
don't we
but I
do
have
that?
any
But
questions.
I want to ask Jim first if you have any questions before we go to the public. You don't have a mic, and
here, we'll borrow
Larry can.
this one. So this is the fastest way, James.
Yeah, I wanted to say a couple things since the Vice Mayor brought up the UIC vote. On that vote, I think that part of the reason why we voted the way we did was that there were two things going on that I think are important to point out. right now that change the way we would have looked at it if we were looking at it today. And the first thing is we didn't feel like we had guidance from the city council to pursue this fiber to the premises. I think there was a lot of interest on our part. It led to a very fruitful and long discussion, and there's obviously a great deal of history involved here. So I think personally the commissioners were interested, but we didn't necessarily feel like we had guidance, which is different now. And I also just want to point out that I think that I wasn't the only one who had some skepticism about some of the numbers, some of the key input numbers that fed into the way the study had been done. And if you think that the system is going to be set up and going to lose money based on the fact that the costs are such, but you don't think those costs have been captured correctly, it makes it really hard to make a decision. I mean, if it's presented that it's going to be a money loser, but you actually think that those inputs are incorrect, then it makes it tough to move forward. So I think that going through this type of process that's been presented here would help create a much better point of discussion, much more informed discussion. So that's where I think we got really stuck with a couple of those items. And I think that was. I don't think I have any other. The only other question I had, which is a small question, is does the city review the EIR? Are they the reviewing agency for the environmental impact review? Did they do the CEQA review?
I mean, versus us going out to.
I mean, no. So do we? Does the city actually? They're responsible for doing the review.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Ultimately, yes. Okay. Right. Thank you. And with that, now let's go to. I have 3 from the public: Jeff, Andy, and Herb Borak. In any order.
Okay, about this whole item, it seems to me that we've done study after study, and if you identify a common factor among them, it's staff doesn't want to do it, so staff picks the consultant that is willing to say, let's not do it. So this next study, the consultant had better be picked a different way, and what does council recommend for that different way? Oh, yes. I've recommended many times that one of the first things the people should do is count up how many premises of each type we have, because that information hasn't been present in a lot of the previous studies, right? How many single-family dwellings, how many MDUs, how many businesses, and for each of those categories, how many currently get aerial utilities, how many get undergrounded utilities, but the conduit is already there to put the fiber in, and how many would you have to dig up the street to put in the conduit to put in the fiber. Another approach before actually hiring, the counting up how many premises of each type doesn't require an external consultant. That's something the city can do by itself, and you should insist that that be done, let's say, in the next month before we talk about spending any money on a consultant. Another thing that the city could do by way of taking advantage of the studies that have already been done is just use an auditor, go back through the studies and find out where the mistakes have been, and then the next consultant say, okay, you can make this modern, up-to-date, take essentially the same sort of approach, figure out what's different, but don't start out with blue sky, and don't just say, well, we have the expertise, so here's the number, and you just have to believe it, which is essentially what the last study did. In terms of wireless, if you accomplish nothing else today other than just saying, we're not going to do anything about wireless until we get fiber to the home under control, I think that would serve the city very well. If you have to do wireless at all, what you should do is establish a wireless utility and then try to figure out whether people that want wireless are willing to pay for it. If it's for public safety people, are the public safety people willing to pay for it? If they're not going to get it, right? If the people who want it, citizens on the street, want it and are not willing to pay for it, well, then they're just not going to get it. And finally, if somebody is going to get it, the best way to implement wireless is to start by putting in the same fiber infrastructure that you put in for fiber to the home, and then just using those fibers wherever they go and wherever wireless needs them to do fiber backhaul for all of your wireless. That's the way to do world-class wireless. In terms of the Citizen Advisory Committee, I think TAC made a big mistake last time by just handing it over to the city manager without providing any parameters. And so between May 14th and today, basically nothing's been done. We know that 8 people applied, and that's all. They're sitting on their hands. They're willing to work. They just don't have anything to do.
Thanks, Jeff. I appreciate your talking.
Okay.
Andy Boggio?
Press start, Liz.
Hi. So 3 brief points. One is about the FTTP master plan. The document as it stands today does make the assumption that a third party will build, operate, and own that. And I just want to echo Councilman Klein's remarks that I think it's premature to come to that conclusion, that we should examine the business models. I worry that if we take our current set of incumbents and more or less replace them with another incumbent, third-party incumbent, that will sort of get the orchestra changes, but the music remains the same. So I'd like to see what the study concludes that the cost of doing FTTP will be. I'd like to match that against our dark fiber revenues and see what kind of a plan makes the most sense. So let's withhold the business model until we have more information. Second point is on wireless, and here I want to more or less echo what Jeff said. They're mostly like to do things in parallel, right? Make progress on everything you can at the same time. But I would go slowly on wireless for 2 reasons. Jeff gave one of those reasons, and that is that a wireless overlay is inexpensive and easy once fiber is deployed. You just build it on top. You've got cheap, available backhaul wherever you need it. You're all set. The other thing is that wireless technology is moving more quickly than fiber or copper technology. Just in the last less than 12 months, 802.11.AP has come out. We're seeing some products for that new Wi-Fi technology that provide much higher performance. So wireless is a technology that's advancing more quickly, and we actually will benefit some by waiting a little bit before we go too far with an investment in wireless. Then the third point is the question about, should we supply, should our fiber to the premises infrastructure supply video or not? And I believe we're really on a cusp, right? We're just starting to see cable subscriptions go down. They're not going down quickly, but they're going down slowly, and that's never happened before. And I believe that trend will continue. So at some point, it'll be easy to say, don't provide video. Google's already made that decision. We'll need to make that decision when we're a little farther along. But I think we're on the cusp about whether we should provide video or not. Okay? Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Herb Borak.
Thank you, Chairness and Committee. Dr. Reichenthal, welcome. And I want to thank City Manager Keene for bringing Dr. Reichenthal along. Any RFP should be approved by the council. Rather than just directing staff to do an RFP, it should be a recommendation to the council as to what should be in the RFP. I don't agree with the model of a builder operator, or of going out and looking at all the different possibilities of what to do. I agree with the previous speakers about wireless on top of fiber to the premises. I also believe smart grid to be robust and secure would be better with fiber than wireless. You might get information through wireless, every hour or every day, but if you want instantaneous, you need to do it by fiber. the city attorney's opinions are not mentioned for the fiber to the premises because the staff report assumes a design build. Previous city attorneys said that that the city should not own the optronics, but it could own the dark fiber. The alternative model, I think, should be first to change what's referred to as the master plan. It's really a network design, and if we use those terms, I think it would be better. Secondly, I think the network designers could be right in the community. It's the pricing, is who's going to figure out what all the things cost that you might need some help on if staff can't do it. But I think we should rely on our community, the citizens in the community, to do it rather than once again going out to an RFP. The model that I suggest that we should use is to rely upon our dark fiber fund and to have structural separation. That is, in addition to the citizens designing the network, that the dark fiber fund can front the money for building the fiber plant, and that's one RFP for that, for whoever's going to build it after it's been designed. The second RFP is for the council choosing the brands of optronics. What are we going to be using? And the third RFP would be for choosing the network operator. And one of the things you're doing when you design the network is determining service level agreements and service level objectives. Because when you do the third RFP, you're going to be choosing a network operator who's going to be committed to placing in the optronics that will meet those service level objectives and those service level agreements. So it seems to me part of the difficulty I have with the staff report is that it's doing what we've done before. As Vice Mayor Shepard has indicated, and giving different words about it, I think doesn't help. I think rather than have what the Citizens Committee I think should be doing is saying this is what we want the network to look like, and bring that out in the community in an iterative process. And then once the council approves that, we can then do that 3-level RFP process that I indicated. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. And is anyone else wanting to speak? If not, okay, thank you very much, and we will go back. So, Jim, before we go on with this, you said you'd like some indication from us of where we would like to go with this first portion of it before you get into the second discussion. So, I think what we're discussing is, how shall we proceed? What should be the next step? You have suggested something. It actually is what I am comfortable with, but the council members are slightly different on this. Greg?
Well, I would definitely support what we're talking about, as long as we understand that Larry's point is a good one. And so as long as we're clear on that, Larry's point being that we're not locking ourselves into into bringing other telecom service providers, that we have the right to do it. But I clearly think we should go ahead and do the scope of work, retain the telecom consulting firm, conduct the environmental review, and at that point we should come back and discuss issuing the RFP, because that only occurs anyway after the first 2 steps, correct?
Yeah, that would be the case. We would be, obviously we'd get the consultant assistance, we do the basic work, but we would be coming back ultimately to the committee and the council with a design for the design for the RFP or some alternative. But we would at least have a clear foundation for, what we're really saying, what the network design is, what the scale is, the environmental review has been done, all of those things. So we're saying, I don't want to say it's turnkey, but it almost is in some ways. And the question is, okay, who's going to run this?
Right. So I guess I would move that.
Second, and I do want to speak to it.
Would you like to speak to your thing?
Yes.
When my turn comes.
No, you
I'm
second
not
it.
speaking.
Yeah.
So.
You want to say any more?
No,
to the motion? Okay. Councilmember Klein.
I'm just concerned about the timeline. And so
I presume you don't mean today, you mean in the future.
we
get done.
I'm here all night. The schedule of initiating the RFP process, so on and so forth. Could we go back over that and see if there's any way to maybe shorten the timeline?
So you had estimated 9 months, was that it? Did I hear that, Jim? So that's what your point is that would include getting the environmental review and the approval and all of that done within that time frame.
That's about right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm all too familiar with how long EIRs take, but I would hope that we don't need an EIR on this. That
Right.
I'd actually be surprised if we do, but who knows?
Right.
So if we cut it to a mitigated negative deck, we still 9 months, or we can get that down to 6 months?
Well, it could probably be reduced by 3 months if it was a mitigated negative declaration.
So why don't we make this, obviously, this is dependent or interactive on the scale of the environmental review. And I think our preliminary review, but not looking at what the ultimate design is that we would expect a mitigated deck would be sufficient.
Well, my reason for hustling things along or trying to get is that this has sometimes is a fast-moving field, and I would just worry that while we're studying, something else comes along, and the study might be out of date before it's very old. So.
Would you
Anyway,
be comfortable with 6 to 9 months with them?
No,
this
this is a pep talk, Liz.
You should have prefaced it. This is a pep talk.
Because
my wishbone offense.
You should have guessed, right?
Wishbone's really out of style, but
It is.
maybe you want to go back to the split T. Okay, so there's no timeline in the motion, but some pep talk's over.
All right, we'll put pep talk in the minutes.
One thing you haven't addressed is the Citizen Advisory Committee. I mean, I think in the same vein, I'd like to see that sort of rev up, but I think you're waiting for guidance on what the...
Yeah, I think on both of these, both this and the wireless aspect of it, and then we've got some clarity to which to engage with the...
And we actually have that down, I'm sorry, we have that down at the very end, and I think we can address it then, Jim, and you'll be comfortable with it.
So I guess I also would like to just understand the timeline that if we're doing negative deck, how did you see this breaking out over the 6 months with a negative deck and 9 months with an EIR? Or were we just sort of guesstimating?
It's a guess.
Okay. And how do we ensure, I mean, can you give us updates at least where we are in the process so we know that it's happening, we know that
Right,
where you
and
guys
we'll
are?
continue to meet as a committee, so
Right.
so it will go out to the public as well as to what the progress is that we're making. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to be supporting this because this, I think, will give us the technical information we need to understand what it is, what our hurdles are in the field, in actually going out and kind of taking a look at how our streets are, how our poles are, et cetera. And that will give us that will inform us as to what it is that could be built and how much, and we're going to get costs out of this as well. So from what I can tell, this is completely different from the 2 other RFPs that were done, which were just an analysis of almost the way Google goes into a neighborhood of whether or not you've got enough of a teeth in a neighborhood that might want to, sign up for fiber if it comes to their street. And that was just a business plan. This actually is the technical information that we need. And I think you're following the RFP process that we learned about when we were back at conference. They had a very strategic mechanism for going through the RFP, which was, they even have a poster on, which was easy to follow, and it made complete common sense, just the nuts and bolts of how to get this prepared. So we're going through those steps right now, and I would support those steps, because then as we then start to see what we have, we'll be able to go into the next conversation, which is what we need to deliver, the why question. Why are we doing this? So, thank you.
We can take a vote on it, but it sounds to me as though it's consensus. Does anyone
We need
dissent?
to take a vote.
Yeah,
Yes. Is there any dissent?
yeah. No.
If that, then it's unanimous. And thank you for your comments. So that would take us to our second, the part of it, getting into the wireless. And I noticed you were getting ready for this, Jonathan.
I've got this.
Yeah, and your failure to get the computer going will not be held against you, Mr. CIO.
That's right.
If we had a Mac up there, I could have solved it for you guys, but then that's a different subject.
Got a bunch of computer guys out here, so.
So could I just say one thing before we get into this? I just want to be clear. The staff is not opposed to fiber. Actually, we're gung-ho about it, and the council's been very clear about wanting to do this sort of stuff. And the last thing we want to do is study stuff just for the point of studying stuff. I mean, might as well just... We think this is the fastest path to get to a decision point, and we've got the pep talk, so we'll get to work. Thanks.
Important to get that pep talk down. Okay, so, Jonathan.
Jonathan Reichenthal, Chief Information Officer. I was texting to get some help with that.
Delegating, I like to see that.
Yeah.
It's a complete
wireless in operation.
That is right, actually, in practice. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present here. Community members made excellent points, which I'll largely echo, around both the evolving state of wireless and in terms not only of usage, but also the technologies themselves. I do think our staff believes that we should separate these two approaches and not make them dependent on each other. We do believe that we can make progress on both without jeopardizing one or the other. If we are truly to approach a connected city, doing the right thing to do is to fully understand our options as it relates to wireless connectivity in a connected city. There are, let me just say that we are leveraging past work that was done and not repeating work we've done in the past. What we are proposing today puts some things in action, which we'll want your, we'll request your support on. I'll just start with, again, why we might, why are we proposing that we look at a variety of wireless options, and I would just preface it to say, although City Manager Jim Keane said this, there's a broad set of technologies in wireless, and even among staff, sometimes we get confused about the specific technology. It's not a specific technology, it's a series of technologies, ranging from cellular to radio to Wi-Fi and some other emergent technologies. In this proposal today, we are looking at exploring the diversity of wireless solutions for our city, but breaking it up between some near-term things we can do to actually see wireless happen in the city, and longer-term actions that might, for example, overlay on an expansion of our fiber, as members of the community said, as well as take advantage of technologies that aren't yet ready for prime time in any city. The notion of putting wireless on top of fiber is a strong thought in terms of the complementary nature of those. In communities where fiber doesn't exist, the getting information from a device back to the source and back to the device leaps from wireless to wireless. As you can imagine, in a community with fiber, it runs through the fiber from the wireless connection, meaning that you have significantly better quality connectivity for your wireless. So what we're proposing today is a RFP
What
to
page
go
are
out.
you on?
Pardon, we're on page 6 of the PowerPoint tech.
I saw you
Looks like
flip.
the analog approach.
And help apparently is on the way. By the time I get it fixed, then we'll be in it.
We will be done, right?
We want to create an RFP that would allow staff to come back to this committee to make some choices that we could then issue to a construction company to build something. So there aren't other interim steps. The scope of this RFP would be to ensure that we have properly assessed the potential use cases or the uses of it, the costs of each solution or hybrid solutions, and then a very important piece is how much it would cost to sustain any set of solutions we adopted. In terms of just looking at use cases, I should just say, I should mention, just list those as possibilities. We do think that there is a strong case to be made for some very tactical use of wireless to improve how our public safety teams interact with each other. We think there is a very interesting potential for use of a wireless network in the event of a citywide catastrophe that wouldn't rely on the existing infrastructure, but allow us to help ourselves and first responders in the event of a major catastrophe. We think that there are technologies that could help much more of our increasingly mobile staff, our inspectors and engineers that go out and do work every day increasingly using tablets and other mobile devices. We think it would be, it's worth looking at determining what needs we might explore for smart grid options that will likely come in the future. And not in that it's in any particular order, but Wi-Fi as a public utility. Looking at even near-term options such as putting Wi-Fi in every park in Palo Alto or other public spaces just as a very convenient utility. Increasingly, there's some additional uses. We're moving into a world of sensors in cars, in different devices, and they will rely on wireless technologies to be effective. Future communities will utilize sensors more and more. Let's see what else I want to share with you. I think I've actually covered the bulk of what it would be. The RFP would come back. The firm or consultant will help us quantify some of these particular valuable uses for the community for different costs and potential timelines. We would ask the consultant to timeline the different options so that we can get near-term benefits, potentially from some very creative uses of Wi-Fi, as we discussed. I talked about that. It would be useful for them to make some choices, and then, depending on what we selected, we would go out and find a firm to actually build the near-term solutions with consideration for future considerations. That's all I got, actually. If you'd like to add anything.
Let me just add something, Jonathan. Going back to the comments from our citizen friends, we agree completely that the technical connection between fiber as a backhaul and Wi-Fi wireless technologies is key. Some of the foundation work that the utility staff had done over the past couple of years as we were looking at this was even looking at sort of strategic extension of our existing dark fiber ring to be able to support some of these wireless initiatives, even in advance of being able to provide full city fiber to the premises fiber. We shouldn't ignore, though, also we already have an existing 40-mile fiber ring that we could be plugging, high-speed Wi-Fi and other technologies in all across our downtown and other areas and make it ubiquitous and available, to the public in lots of different ways. We think that's worthwhile exploring in the near term, I think, as Jonathan said. Thanks.
Good. Thank you. Questions for Jonathan? Greg?
So, Jonathan, what kind of wireless speeds? I mean, I want Wi-Fi that really works. And, I go to these airports and they say they have free Wi-Fi and, you can barely get on. That's really slow. The traffic barely works. And sometimes even around at some of the local coffee shops and stuff, it's fairly slow. So I guess that's really my question is, you know, it's great to do Wi-Fi, that's what I want to do, but I'd like to see high-quality Wi-Fi, and I wanted to get a sense of where we were on the quality scale of what you're thinking about.
Sure. Thanks for the great question. I think that there are communities all over the country who ultimately, after Wi-Fi, municipal Wi-Fi is deployed, have been disappointed for the very reasons you say. They've deployed Wi-Fi in downtown areas and other areas, and the connectivity is either slow or not available, spotty in certain areas, and people give up. And some communities have simply switched off their municipal Wi-Fi. We would not want to do that here. It would be an important characteristic of our rollout that it was high speed and reliable. We have one, although small, example, as we explored our public-private partnership to deploy Wi-Fi at Cogswell Plaza. The bar for us and staff was it's got to be fast, both uploads and downloads. Today, with the particular Wi-Fi implementation, on the best case scenario, and I mean just a handful of people using it, download speed should be about 25 megabits. And we're experiencing about 17 megabit uploads. Now, of course, add more people to that, and that quality comes down. And so whatever design, and I would, myself and other colleagues would take a good look at this, we would want the manner in which it was designed to ensure there was sufficient coverage from Wi-Fi devices, some overlap, as well as good devices, as well as eliminating any barriers in the way that the information travels from the device through fiber to the ISP, the internet provider, and back. So it would not be acceptable, I think, to the community, to staff of the council, to have to make this type of investment and to have a disappointing result. It has to be good.
And so just to quantify it a little bit, I guess my personal feeling is that it's got to be better than what's on my 3G or 3G low or whatever. It's got to be better than my 4. And so I guess that was really the question, is when you say fast, I have no idea how fast my phone is. And, you know, you just told us 25 and 17. Do you have a sense of what, you know, if I'm on ATT or Verizon, what the upload or download speeds are?
There may be more qualified people to answer that question. I don't know the answer to that right now.
I'd say my own experience would be that's faster than what your phone will do. But I'm also with you. Excuse me. I've turned off the Wi-Fi at the SFO and gone back to my cellular because it's too slow. So obviously,
right. So cellular is faster at the airport than, you know, than the free Wi-Fi.
Just much more expensive. Larry.
It seems to me that I recall that Mountain View's experience with free Wi-Fi, somehow in cooperation with Google, didn't work out. Do you recollect what that story is?
Perhaps Jim and Clement here will chime in too. I would say that I have colleagues and friends who live in Mountain View, and there is a free municipal Wi-Fi experience there. It's just not good enough to actually do anything reliably. I haven't heard any of my friends or colleagues say it's good enough to do work or experience Wi-Fi in the way it should be experienced.
Yeah, I think that was obviously an early stage. I think it was about $1 million program or whatever. Yeah, because they've sort of spun it off into a little not-for-profit sort of arm in Google.
Do you have anything to add to that, Jen?
Not really.
Anyone out there know anything about Google about Wi-Fi in Mountain View?
It's not municipal. It's run by Google. Google says if you don't like it,
Go to the mic, please. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, I don't know if we need that
She's
on
yelling
the
at
mic.
me.
I get the picture, Jeff. Thank you. It's okay. I think Jeff has explained it very well.
Just to follow up, Santa Clara also has a Wi-Fi that they run off their utility network. Do you know much about that?
Yes, that was the MetroFi Wi-Fi system. That was a private venture that essentially went out of business. The city decided to buy those assets, and they're now using it for smart grid communications platform. And also, I believe they have some element of free Wi-Fi in certain areas, hotspots or hot zones within the community, but they essentially took over an existing private Wi-Fi network that I believe the vendor's name was Metrofine. I may be wrong about that, but they had built in other communities too.
And so for roughly 3 to 5 million is what you're telling me is we could have really, you know, I don't know what the term is. I don't want to say enterprise class Wi-Fi maybe, but, you know, Wi-Fi that works better than our phones.
So at best, the 3 to 5 million is an educated guess number, and I think this accounts for blended wireless, which could be more than just Wi-Fi. Certainly, we would have to define, in the options that we would get back in an RFP would be, do you put wireless in every neighborhood entirely across the city, or are you identifying certain key areas, university or California or parks? So all of that will be considered, I think. And you know, to get the best case is more dollars, more devices, and more of a build out of our fiber.
Okay. But what the RFP will tell us then, that's
Yes,
the key. It's
exactly.
getting the RFP,
Yes.
figuring it out.
Nancy?
Yeah, thank you. First off, I think that this is sort of where we were leaving off with some of the reports we were doing last year. It was like, you know, build out to the substations, get some wireless going. Let's start going forward with this. And so this is obviously something I'm very supportive of. I agree with the comments made about the strength of the signal and the broadband capacity. I think that I would like to be better informed about how to speak about broadband speed, and maybe you could help me get educated like that. But the buzz that I understood with my takeaway from Kansas City conference was it's not so much about fiber, which is really important for getting a good broadband delivery, but it is about what you're able to deliver as a broadband speed. And so what is your broadband speed? And that's kind of the cachet, you know, as to how your city can make that deliverable. So I want to understand, is this, the purpose of this though, would I be able to, if this works, and we're able to get the strength of signal, and I do think that 5 years from now it will be a better product than it is today, because I think if they're making those leaps in the industry, that is the industry to start making leaps in, because then you don't have to wire everything. You don't have to lay down cable, which is, you know, something that's been discovered many places where you don't have to dig up stuff. You can just amplify. Would this be the purpose of it? Is it also for me to be able to get to walk away from my DSL line at home, or now I'm on Uverse? Would I be able to hang that bill up and say, gee, I'm on the city. I don't have to do, you know, I don't have to go out and fetch my Wi-Fi anymore. Is that what, yeah, I know, that's what I'm thinking. No. So, and I know that we're going to get to the why in the scope of work, user analysis, needs assessment, and business model. But could you just give me you know, can you tell me, is it just for emergency backup, or what is it? What's the why right now? I mean, what will it benefit to my quality of life in Palo Alto?
So if we were talking just about Wi-Fi, we would be we may not be talking about being in your house and being able to take advantage of free Wi-Fi from the city. We've not seen that experience anywhere.
I just wanted to know, is that what sort of, when it says public Wi-Fi, what exactly are we talking about public Wi-Fi?
So
it would be in the parks and
sure, my
downtowns.
guess, my educated guess would be that it would be in areas populated by lots of people, where it's a convenience, where it's increasingly we have smartphones and tablets and other devices. Having ubiquitous connectivity in those populated areas would be highly beneficial.
And would Starbucks be able to walk away from their system, or is this, or they would have still keep? I'm just trying to figure out at what level, you know, it starts to become a savings kind of for us doing this. So
sure. I think we would certainly have that as part of the study. It does,
okay.
With almost every restaurant and coffee shop on University having Wi-Fi, does it make sense for us to have a series of Wi-Fi access points
right
along University? The answer might come back maybe, or perhaps there's some areas. I do think that we would probably see some interest both from the community and in the study to wireless in parks and plazas in the community.
Yeah.
And then that's Wi-Fi, and then we would also be capturing the more robust wireless solutions that perhaps public safety would use, so that they're never out of range of a connection point anywhere in the city or in the hills. The support, sort of future-proofing for the potential for utilities to explore smart grid solutions, which often rely, which can be, by the way, connected to fiber to the premise, but also could look to both Wi-Fi and other wireless solutions.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to get a picture of this because I don't want anybody saying, "Gosh, I'm only going to do a 6 months contract with you," because by then we'll have public city Wi-Fi. And
I should say
that's not what we're building here. What we're building is sort of a backbone for our emergency and for some of our parks, and so that's fine. I just want to.
If I could, we don't mind if I could have one item to that.
Sure.
Our emergency services director, who participates in several research studies in the valley around what happens after an earthquake or some other big disaster. There are a number of proposals that they've explored that we would factor into this that could be available to the city and would be unique to our city in the aftermath of an event.
Okay.
Such as solar-powered communication.
Right. Good. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
I do have one question, sorry. This is back to my concern about our timeline. Jim, it seems to me that sometimes one of our roadblocks is out of the purchasing department. We draft somebody drafts a request for proposals, and somehow it just doesn't get out to the interested field through the purchasing department for some period of time.
No, we should make one.
Am I imagining that, or is that no problem?
I'm sure that if I turned it over to the user department, they would tell you, yes, that's an issue for lots of different reasons, not just does it get out in time. Actually, there's often a lot of complexity in the review and the requirements that procurement would like to see, and they'll be sent back to the departments. But I think definitely sometimes our ability to give in advance a completely accurate schedule is sometimes compromised by that interface there. I'd like that to be different. Yes, thank you. Yes. So, well, we've had a number of efforts underway in that regard, and there's certainly been some streamlining and some changes. At the other hand, sometimes we've gotten complaints and criticism about, purchasing and procurement not being fastidious enough. So the best thing for me to do would be able, just as it relates to these in particular, to be able to report back to the committee more specifically on the timelines. We can do that. Did you guys hear what I just committed to?
Madam Chair, would you like a motion?
I'm going to do one thing. Andy asked if he could have 60 seconds to tell us what speed means. So if you just grab the mic, we'll give you 60 seconds.
Very short. So for wireless speeds, there's three things that affects the speed that you see, and you'll see why SFO is so bad. So one of them is a fundamental technology. It's what frequencies are used and how they're modulated. That affects the bandwidth, how many bits per second can be sent. You change that by buying new equipment, because that's all about the hardware. The second thing is how strong the signal is, how far you are away from the access point. The farther you are farther away you are, the weaker the signal, the more noise on the signal, and therefore less data gets transmitted. So if you're farther away from the access point, your bandwidth goes down. Then the third factor is how many people are sharing the same access point. If you have it all to yourself, you get whatever bandwidth that technology offers based on your signal strength. If two people are sharing the same access point, they each get less than half, right? Because there's extra overhead that's incurred as soon as you've got what's called contention. 3 people share, each gets less than a third. So it goes down quickly with other people, and that's why SFO is going to have a lot of people sharing the same access point, and your bandwidth's going to be terrible. So how do you improve things? To improve the technology, you buy the latest. To improve signal strength, more access points, so you're close to 1. To reduce sharing, more access points, so they're not shared so much. That's all.
Thanks, Andy.
Can I just have a follow-up?
Yes, please.
So, in terms of more access points, we have a fiber backbone. Say it runs near a plaza. I don't know if it does, but say it does. Can you have as many access points on that fiber as you want? So
there's ultimately a limit because there's only a certain number of frequencies. If you have 2 access points that are using the same frequency and the 2 close together, they'll clash. So there is some fundamental limit, but depending on the technology, it could be substantial.
Okay. Larry, you said you have a motion.
I would move the staff recommendation with regard to the proposed wireless network plan and ultimate RFP.
Second.
Okay, do you want to speak further? Do you want to speak further, Greg?
Actually, it was Councilmember Shepherd who
That's okay.
seconded.
Who'd second it? I'm sorry.
Councilmember Shepherd.
Well, we both did.
Well,
I'll speak to it.
then let's flip a coin for.
We'll let her second.
I'll speak to it. First off, I'm delighted that this is being brought forward, so thank you. Second off, you said something that I think we're going to have to navigate at some point, and that is Wi-Fi as a utility. I wrote it down. We need to look at Wi-Fi as a utility, and that sometimes is the tension point, because it hasn't historically been a utility like deliverables of clean water, gas, sewer, and the stuff that you actually exist with. And yet at the same time, when I hear on the radio that hardline telephones are not going back into where Sandy wiped out the coast in New Jersey because they can only get a 20% sign-up rate, and they don't want to spend the copper wire to bring it to the premises, I'm realizing that Wi-Fi as a utility and other techniques to get this type of virtual experience without hardwiring things is where we have to go. And so I think that we just, we need to keep going on this, and we need to stay focused on it. And at some point, the state might come in and decide to deem it, a utility. But they haven't yet, and so we still have a little bit of freedom right now. Also, question, the costs are coming out of this from our dark wire fund. So, and we can do wireless in that fund, I'm assuming. I think Molly did give some definition as to what we could do. So I just want to, I think that this is a great opportunity for us. I think it's great that we're having these funds available to start to move forward with really strategically looking how we want to start our next delivery. Thank you.
Unless somebody else wants to add something, thank you all very much. You've spent a lot of time on this. Jim Fleming, you've had to attend 2 meetings out of town. I appreciate that. Thank you, Jonathan, for being here today. And Jim, let me look to you for a little guidance. I'm sorry. All those in favor? Aye. Aye. Look to you for a little guidance on when our next meeting should be, perhaps in 6 weeks.
Are we going to go through Citizens Advisory Committee before we?
Yes, we'll do that in just a minute.
Yeah, my thinking would be by early November, we should be planning on coming back, and we have some of the assignments, including even being able to report on where we are on the procurement process and those things. And I also would think that sort of jumping the gun by that time, I would have been able to appoint a Citizens Advisory Committee. I mean, we now have some direction, so we know the scope of what it is that we would be doing.
Mm-hmm. So on the back, it says Citizens Advisory Committee, appointment by the city manager, advisory committee role and advisor qualifications and so forth. If you're all comfortable with that, we will, next note on, I will ask our city manager to proceed apace.
Thank you.
Does that work?
I think we already gave it the advice to do the citizens utility.
No, you did.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give you an update on it.
Just giving it again. Yeah. So that it's absolutely clear.
Right.
Okay.
I did just want to share that, we've gotten 6 to 8 folks who have said they would be interested in serving on that, and I would say I don't feel bound to put every person who said they'd be interested on the committee, and I also think that for kind of a representative group dealing with maybe different perspectives or areas of expertise, we actually also might in addition do some outreach to folks who have not already sort of volunteered as we put the committee together. But we will, those folks who have expressed interest and others, we would, by the time we're back before the committee of this committee, have established the advisory committee to support the work you've directed us to do.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to adjourn us, and thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate it, especially former people I've worked with.